Yes, folks, the populist nationalist parties romped home in the EU elections. Farage thumped the mainstream parties in the UK. Le Pen beat Macron in France, and Salvini romped home in Italy, and as did Orban in Hungary. Now I'll start this off today with Farage's results. So we can see Brexit on 31.6%, and we come all the way down to the Conservatives on 9.1% and Labour on 14.1%. Well, folks, that says it all. The tide has finally turned in the UK. Now, folks, that should be a shot across the bow for parties, or the centrist parties, in New Zealand and Australia. But today I'll just focus on Australia.
Announcing his new look team, the Prime Minister wanted a female focus.
The Ministry maintains that I announced today the record representation of women in Cabinet for an Australian government, with 7 members.
There you go, folks. Now, this guy has a mandate to take the coalition back to the right. But no, what does he do? He takes it to the left with identity politics. They just don't get it. And how patronising is that for women, to be chosen because they are women and not because of their ability? Scott, you just cannot be left and right at the same time. It just simply doesn't work. So now let's listen to Albanese.
Running on the platform of being a straight talker.
Absolutely.
So what is the position on climate change, which Bill Shorten ran so strongly on, just on this one policy, the emissions reductions target? Do you need to urgently review that before the next election?
Look, we'll review all of our policies before the election, but it will be in the frame of the need to take action on climate change.
Oh dear. That was the main reason Labour lost the election. Yet here's the new leader doing exactly the same, pushing exactly the same nonsense. In other words, folks, we know what's best for you, so shut up and take it. And now for some analysis of the EU election by Steve Bannon. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, good to have you here. We have just a tiny bit of a delay because he is in Paris. Why do you want to see the end of the EU, and what difference would that make to Americans?
It's not the end of the EU at all. In fact, the rise of these populist nationalist parties, they call them the sovereignty movement over here. It's actually to make the EU stronger. It's to make Europe stronger. But it's going to be a collection of nations, individual nation states that are guided by its citizens. And I think you saw this weekend was quite historic. So this is not to make Europe weaker. This is not to make the EU weaker. What it is to make these nations stronger and have the EU really be a collection of nations instead of one United States of Europe. That project was actually ended this week. It was Macron's vision. He called it the Renaissance Project. None of the leading governments in Europe signed up for it. And then you saw the French people reject it on Sunday, and you saw in Italy and the UK and other places, Poland and Hungary, overwhelming support for the populist nationalist movement. So this is not, it's not to destroy Europe, it's actually to make Europe stronger. That's part of the Project Fear that the established order is trying to put into people, but it's dead wrong.
Well, we've read that Macron, the president of France, has been sort of scrambling to hold on to the center, that what happened in the election on Sunday was an erosion of those center parties and an increase, obviously, in the seats on the left and on the right. So, but if you still put some of those in the middle together, and if he can scramble together support, how tenuous are the victories that you saw on Sunday, do you think, in the end?
I don't think they're tenuous at all. In fact, I think in Brussels tonight, you see Marine Le Pen, you see Salvini, Nigel Farage, others trying to put together what's called a supergroup of these populist nationalist parties, which are kind of distributed in the way they do it in the European Parliament. They're trying to combine that so they have a critical mass. Remember, the center here, you have both a socialist and then you have kind of a center-left, center-right. Those center-left, center-right parties imploded. The Tory party, the Republic Party of de Gaulle here in France. These things just absolutely imploded over this weekend. And so you're seeing the rise of populism, you're seeing the rise of nationalism. Now these leaders are going to try to put this together so they have a critical mass in the European Parliament. Knowing that the people voted against any further integration, they're now going to try to have this powerful blocking minority to make sure the bureaucrats in Brussels can't force anything else on them.
So what, I mean, what is it? You know, for people who haven't been following this at home, Savini said that there's going to be a new Europe. What does that mean? What's going to change?
It's a Europe of nation states. Remember, go back to 2016. Brexit and the Trump election are inextricably linked. I think if Brexit hadn't happened, you wouldn't have empowered the deplorables. You wouldn't have empowered the kind of these working class people to come out and support Donald Trump. That's why Trump.
Yeah, and I'm still waiting for that to happen in New Zealand.
That segment you started at the beginning is very prophetic. He could see it right then. It was going to be very important. People want to take their country back, want to take their borders back. Basically, citizens want to get more control of their countries and more control of the politicians that directly report to them, not faceless bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., or not faceless bureaucrats in Brussels.
Yeah.
He saw Brexit for what it was, and now you're seeing the next wave of it. Right? Macron in 17 kind of stopped it. We've seen another wave of it with these charismatic leaders like Orban, Salvini, Le Pen, and Farage.
Well, you call them charismatic, and some people call them anti-immigrant. They call them anti-Semitic. They say that they see, you know, sort of a throwback to Europe of pre-World War II. Here's Angela Merkel in an interview that she did with CNN talking about her concerns about this movement.
We have always a certain number of anti-Semites amongst us. Unfortunately, there is to this day not a single synagogue, not a single daycare center for Jewish children, not a single school for Jewish children that does not need to be guarded by German policemen.
She's saying, you know, even the nursery schools, every Jewish institution, you know, under this new order, if this comes to pass, will need to be guarded by security.
And why? Listen on.
Listen, this is the funniness of Angela Merkel. You know, today she announced she was supposed to leave, but she saw the rise of these populist nationalist parties, and she didn't think the leadership she had in the Christian Democrats are strong enough. She basically said, "I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere." Here's the hypocrisy. I was in Berlin 2 weeks ago. I spent 5 days there. Actually, I sat down with some of the senior Jewish leaders, and they told me that they live under fear, and it's not from the right. I had just been meeting with Alternative for Deutschland, the right-wing party. They said they live under fear because of radical Islam and for this unlimited immigration from the Middle East that Angela Merkel let in. And in fact, they said they couldn't even wear their yarmulkes. It just came up the other day. A German authority said the Jewish people in Berlin shouldn't wear their yarmulkes. This shows that Angela Merkel is a total and complete phony, and that's why this whole globalist movement this weekend took a beating. And for her to sit there and try to smear these parties by saying that when in Germany the Jewish leaders are saying we fear what she's allowed to happen with this unlimited immigration, particularly from the radical jihadists that are in the country. That's what they fear in Germany. And people should just go ask the Jewish leaders in Berlin.
Here's what Pope Francis had to say. He said they are often looked down upon, talking about immigrants, and considered the source of all society's ills. That attitude is an alarm bell warning of the moral decline that we will face if we continue to give ground to the throwaway culture.
Oh my God, I just wish this left-wing Pope would just stay right out of politics.
Your reaction?
Yeah, well, look, the Pope is obviously infallible when he's talking about church doctrine, but when he's talking about politics, he's just dead wrong. And this is, once again, he puts all the onus on the populist nationalist movement. These people are good, decent people. They're not racist. They're not nativist. They're not xenophobes. But the problems, these horrific problems in sub-Saharan Africa and in North Africa cannot be solved by working class people in southern Italy. That's what's been the problem, is that the Pope and the rest of these globalists, this kind of party at Davos, want all the problems to be solved by working class people. And that's what Salvini and Orban are speaking for, to say, hey, look, we understand there's a huge problem. We have to work together to solve that problem in sub-Saharan Africa or North Africa or the Middle East. Working class people in Hungary, in France, and in Italy can't solve it. And that's where the Pope continues to kind of, I think, exacerbates this problem. But
yes, folks, people in Europe have finally woken up to these centralist, globalist parties. They've had enough of it, and it's about time that the same thing started happening down under.